In this video, we'll be setting up a login system for our car rental app. This will require us to make a few changes, one to the database and two to the overall flow of our application. So I'll start off with the database changes. I'll just bring up my management studio, and what we'll need is a new table which will store the user information. So I'll just right click on new on tables, go to new, click table, and then what we want is an ID, of course, which would be of type integer. It would be the primary key, and we will set it to be identity, so it will auto increment. And once again, if you're not so familiar with database development, then you can check out my course, my Microsoft SQL Server for Everyone, or my SQL Database Design and Mastery. So after setting up our ID column, we then have the most common user-related fields, which would be username, which I'll set as nvarchar50, and password, which I will set as nvarchar, and I'll set this one to be 100, and I'll explain why. I'll also not allow these two to be null, as well. It doesn't make sense you have a user with neither username nor password, or either or. If they both must be present for a user to be complete, right? So I'll just have those three columns for now. I'll save this and I'll just call this one users. Click OK. And then we have our new table. Now, some schools of thought would say that, you want to use that, track exactly which user is doing what in your application. So if that is your desire, then what you'd want to do is add foreign keys to your other tables, being types of cars and the car rental record, so that you can actually see who is interacting with these tables at what, or these records at whatever point. I won't go that far though. I just want a simple login system so that we can try and restrict access to our application. So after adding this to the database, I have to go back to my code and make a few modifications. So let me just come out of debug mode. And then the first modification I'm going to make is to our EDMX. So whenever you make a change to the database, you want your EDMX or your entity diagram to be aware of those changes. So we added a new table. So I can just right click, go to update model from database. Then when this comes up, you'll see the add tab. And under the add tab, you notice that I have an arrow beside tables, and it's showing me that I have a new table that is in the database, but not in the diagram. So I can just click users, click finish, and then it will go ahead and do whatever process it needs to do, with the end result being the addition of the user table to my EDMX diagram, right? So now my application knows and can access the user's table or user properties, right? If I had set up relationships, like I said, if I had set up the foreign keys between the tables and the user table, then you would see lines going all around the place, because these two are related, and then user would be related to types of car as well as car rental record. But that wasn't done, so your diagram should look like this. Of course, you build, and as you can see, my computer is still loading because it's building, and we'll give it a moment. And now that's done, we can go ahead and design our login form. So I'm just going to go back to Solution Explorer, right click our project, go to add, and then I want a new form, and this one is going to be login. So I'm just going to call it login, and then I click add, give it some time to process all of that. All right, so I went ahead and designed it, and I used the same techniques we've been using up until this point, right? I used the label for the label at the top to depict that it's a login form. I used a table layout, and on the left, I put the labels for username and password. To the right, I put the text boxes, and then I have to make sure that my text boxes have the correct names. So I have TB username, and I have TB password, right? So you can just pause the video, and then of course I have the login button at the end of the day. So you can pause the video here and do your design, similar to mine if you want. If you have a different vision, that's fine. But at the end of the day, we've been learning this, so I'm not going to go over the same things or these basic things over and over and over again, because I hope you've caught up and you're familiar with it. If you're not, then you can review the previous videos and get up to speed with some of these controls and how they work. The next step, however, would be to make sure that the login button works, because once the person provides the username and the password, the next step is for them to actually log in or click login. So of course, on click, we want to do something. Now that something that we're going to want to do involves us interacting with the database and looking and retrieving the username and password to make sure that whatever was entered matches what is in the database. So by way of testing, firstly, I'm going to go back to the database and I'm going to add a record. So let me just refresh my tables, go to my users table, say edit top 200 rows, and then I'm going to put in a manual username, admin, and the password here is going to be the word password, all lowercase, and then that's our first user in our database. So admin password. So that means when I get to the login form, if I provide credentials, username admin, and the password is the word password, then when I click login, it should be able to look in the database, verify that the username I provided matches the one in the database, the password likewise, and then say yes or no, I can go through. All right. So back in our code, like I said, we need to interact with the database. So that means that we need something for that. So we can just do our private read only, and then our object of car rental entities, and I'll call the object underscore DB. And then I will initialize this. Underscore DB is equal to a new instance of car rental entities. There we go. Now in the click event, I'm going to wrap it in a try catch from now. So I'll just say try. Sorry, let me try that again. Try double tap. So you double tap tab and it generates that snippet, right? And then I'll just write out my exception. So I'll give a generic error. So it's never a good idea to actually show the exception message to the user. Like I've said before, even though I've done it before, I'm just showing you that you can, but generally speaking, you probably don't want to, because that means nothing to the user. So you just want to say something went wrong. Please try again. All right. So then that's what you want to do. And then for the try, what we're going to try is to retrieve the values from our form. So I can say var username is equal to tb username dot text. And then the same way, var password is equal to tb password dot text. So we've retrieved the username, retrieved the password that the user has entered. Now, the thing with the username is that you may want to trim it. A trim means that you're taking off white spaces on either side. So I can actually say something like string dot trim. Oh, sorry. No, it wouldn't be string dot trim. String does not have that trim function. It would actually be dot text dot trim, right? So when we say dot trim, whatever string value it is or string variable, and we say dot trim, then what it will do is take off any leading white space or trailing white space from the username. Because if I wrote my username, if I wrote space, or I inadvertently press the space bar while writing, or before writing, or after writing the username, then it would not be a direct match. So you just want to trim it to make sure you don't have any trailing white space or leading white space, so that the text is more absolute during the comparison. You don't want to do that with the password though, because you want to make sure that the person puts in the exact text that is in the database that they put in the actual text box. All right. So after retrieving the username and password, the next thing I want to do is actually compare this or try to find something in the database that matches this combination, right? So I'm going to say var user, which is my object that I'm going to use to retrieve from my database, and my users table, any record. So I want one record, right? So I named my variable user because I'm expecting one record. There shouldn't be two users with the same username and password combination. Even if they have the same password, they shouldn't have the same username at any given point. So I'm expecting only one user to come back, really. And I'm going to say first or default, and then I'm going to throw up a lambda expression. And then I'm going to say I want the first or default user who has a username that matches the username I just got from my text box. And so I can use the and the or just like if I was doing an if statement. And the password in the database directly matches the password in the text box. All right. So once I do that, I'm now going to check if I got back a user or not. So I'll say if user is equivalent to null, then, and if the user is equivalent to null, that means after it searched the database for the first or default user, well, default means null. So for the first user that has the same username that was entered into the text box and the same password that was entered into the text box, if that user comes back as null, right? So if after that operation, this is null, then we want to say something like, please provide valid credentials. All right. So as far as we're concerned, nobody in the database matches that. No, you don't want to tell them exactly what's wrong, as in you don't want to say, yes, I found that username, but your password might be wrong, or vice versa. Because if it was somebody who was trying to maliciously get into your system, you would have solved half of the equation for them, letting them know why they couldn't get into your application. All right. So you want to say if it is null, if no user exists like that, then, please provide valid credentials. We can leave the else blank for now. Of course, that's what would happen if everything is okay, then that's what would happen. So I'm just going to say close. All right. So just for experiment's sake, just for now, we're going to say if it is not correct, then the screen should just give us a message box. If it is okay, then the screen will just close. All right. Now, if we want this window to come up when we press start, then we need to modify our program.cs file. So right now it's going to launch the main window first. What I want for the flow of my application is that when you double click the application to run it, it's actually going to launch the login screen first. And then if it launches the login screen, then you either get in or you don't get in. You either get further, which means you get to the main window, which is our MDI parent, which we've designed to house every other window and functionality of our application, or you're stuck at the login screen. All right. So I wanted to say launch the login window first. So when the application runs, launch the login. So when I click start, then we see our login window come up. So if I type in admin1 and I type in the word password and click login, then nothing comes up. All right. So you see that? Please provide valid credentials. And I'll show you exactly how I got these squares. So you're probably typing inside of it and you're seeing the word password come up and you're seeing squares come up in mine, which just represents the generic character showing that it's obscured, it's masked. So I'm going to show you exactly how I masked mine. I did it in the text box and I skipped the step of showing you, so that's fine. I'll go back. But the point is that when I type in invalid credentials, it won't let me go further. If I type in admin and password and I click login, then it closes. So we see that our application or our login logic is working because it went to the database and it checked and it saw admin as a username, password as a password. And so it did whatever it was supposed to do in the else statement. All right. So let me just go back to the design quickly and show you what I did to the text box. For the text box to mask your text, then what you need to do is provide the password char. So by going to password char and providing, I notice it says char. So that means give it a symbol. If you put slashes, then slashes will appear. If you put an asterisk, then the asterisk will appear. The reason I'm getting squares, however, is that I changed the font. So by changing the font to, well, Marlet, I was just experimenting and I changed mine to Marlet. So what happens is that there's apparently no asterisk in that font, right? So then it just gave me those generic squares to show that, well, it's masking. It would love to use the asterisk, but I don't have an asterisk in this font. So I'm just going to give it the generic square. So, you know, the symbol aside, the point is that you can mask your text by using that password char, because of course you don't want the word password or the person's password to be in plain text while being entered into the database. Now, to fix the flow, all we did was say next or say close, sorry, in the else. What I want to do is actually launch the main window. So I'm going to say var main window is equal to a new instance of main window. And then I'm going to say, well, of course, my semicolon. Then I say main window dot show. All right. And then I want this window to hide. So the thing is that, and let me just show you exactly what's going to happen. So when I launch my application, and then I go ahead and provide valid credentials, so admin and password, and click login, then it's going to bring up the main window, but login is going to be there lingering in the background, which I don't really want. It's not that big of a deal, but what happens is that if I wanted to close the application, I would have to close the main window and then come back and close login, because they're two entirely different windows. I didn't say that login should be an MDI child of the main window. All right, so they're two separate windows and they're both a part of the application. So as long as they're both running, the application would not close. So what I would want to do is hide. And the reason I do hide and not close is that if I say close here, the login window might actually close before the main window shows. All right, I've actually seen that happen before. So I'm going to just say hide. So that means when I provide valid credentials, all right, and then I go ahead and click login, then it will check the database, verify me, launch the main window, and then hide the login window. So that looks a bit cleaner, right? So I log in and now I'm in my application. But then when I close this main window, notice I'm still in debug mode. So debug mode represents that the application is still running, right? Which I don't want. So that means the login window is still, it's hidden. And I can't even get to it because it's really hidden. It's not even showing up in my taskbar. If you're experiencing this right now, it won't be showing up in yours either. So I actually have to click stop. And that's still not desirable, because then that means the process thread would still be running until that person's computer is shut down. So we don't want that. So I'm going to just modify this code a bit more so that we can see our application flow a bit better. So what I want to do is that when I launch my main window, I want it to launch with the notion or with the knowledge of the login window being somewhere. So you realize that these forms are kind of autonomous. So when you launch one or you say .show, the only time one cares about the other is if it's an MDI parent of that one. All the children don't care about each other. They only know about their MDI parent. In this situation, the main window is its own MDI parent with its own children, and the login form is a sibling, meaning it's on the same level as the main window. It's not a child, and it is a main window in and of itself, even though it's not an MDI parent. So the point is that you can't, you have to let one know of the other deliberately, right? But the cool thing is that once you let one know about the other, meaning once I let main window know that there is a login window somewhere, then I can actually manipulate the login window through the main window at any point. So what I'm going to do is pass is in this declaration of an object, I'm going to declare that or pass in an instance of this. So remember that the this keyword means that whatever class I'm operating in, this represents an object of that class. So I'm saying I'm passing an object of the login class or the login form into main window. Now you're seeing that this red line appears because there's no constructor for main window that takes an argument of login. So I'm going to modify my main window. So I just hold down Control and click main window and it jumps over to that form. So if you didn't know that, or that code rather, so if you didn't know that shortcut, now you do. And then what I want to do is let main window know that there is a property, or give it a property of type login, and I'm going to call it underscore login. All right. But then I'm also going to create another constructor. So ctor, let me use up my shortcuts here. And then this main window, this other constructor rather, is going to take an object called login. And so what this one is going to do after initializing component, so remember you always have to initialize component, but then it's also going to initialize my local and private login property that I just created. It's going to initialize it to the value that is coming over in the constructor being initialized here. All right. So once again, what this allows me to do now is that through the rest of the code, once this constructor is used, then I have access to the property underscore login, and then I can do what I want with the login. All right. So all I'm going to do now is say that main window. So I'll just bring up my design for main window. And then I'm going to tell the main window that I want it to have a closing event, right? So we didn't put a load event. No, that's fine. But then I want to say that when you are closing, and I'm just going to look very carefully for the closing event. All right, I scroll too far down. There it is. Form closing. So you have form closed and you have form closing, right? So I'm going to say when you are closing, I want you to do something. So I'm going to double click in that space and I get the form closing event. And then all I'm going to say is that when you are closing, I want you to tell the login object or the login form that, called you initially and passed over itself into your scope so that you know about it. Tell it to close. All right. So what's going to happen is that when the login window is going to launch main window, it's going to pass over an object of itself into the main window. When the main window launches, main window will have launched with knowledge of this login window, and it would be doing whatever it needs to do. All the children are operating whatever it's doing. But then at the end of the day, when it's closing, it will say, well, when I'm closing, I want you to close. So you login window, you close while I am closing, and then everybody's happy. So let's test and see if that works. So when I click start and then I log in, all right, so we have main window and we know that we can do whatever we want to do in main window. But then when we click close main window, then the expectation is that it closes the login screen also. And Visual Studio exiting debug mode is proof that our code worked. All right, so that's one way of setting up a login form. I'm not saying that is the way. I've done this in quite a few ways before, but that is certainly one way that you could use. And I think this was the simplest one to show to somebody who's just getting used to Winforms. But, some people actually launch it as the MDI child. And then, you get into the application, but you have to log in to proceed to get access to the other windows and other menu options. You have a number of ways to implement this kind of flow between your forms. Now, coming back to our login form, there's another major modification that we have to make to our application to make it actually secure. Because the fact is that if somebody gets access to this database and they look and they see admin and the word password, it's all in plain text. You never want to store usernames. Well, sorry, you never want to store passwords in plain text. You always want to do what you call an encryption. So we need to encrypt our our password to make sure that if somebody gained access to the database by whatever means, even if they were walking over your shoulder in the office when you were doing this work, that they wouldn't be able to decipher what that password is. So in order to do encryption, we need to get the help of some third-party libraries. There are a number of encryption algorithms out there. You have SHA-256, you have SHA-1, you have MD5. You could go and research them. But I'm going to help you get some tools, get some help into this project, and then we can do some encryption together. So what we want to do is go to the Solution Explorer, right click our project, and then we'll be using NuGet Package Manager. All right. So this will allow us to browse an open source kind of marketplace to see what we can get to help us along the way. So I'll go to browse. So you see browse, installed, and updates. You saw that you had the entity framework installed, which is what allows us to do LINQ and interact with our database. But what I'm really interested in is encryption. So I can look for encryption. All right, encryption didn't really show me anything. Let's try security. So sometimes you'll come here and you don't necessarily know exactly what you're looking for because there are so many libraries to choose from. But what I'm really looking for is something regarding security. And what I would want, so you see that you have quite a few ones here. You have system, I thought I just saw it, Microsoft.net.security, no. All right, so I found the one that I'm interested in, which is system.security.cryptography.algorithm. So if you look to the right, you'll see a nice description about all it has to offer. I'm sorry if it appears small on my screen, but hopefully you're viewing it on your screen and it is more clear. But you'll see that they have AES, RSA, SHA, HMAC, MD5, and a bunch of others. All right. So you can actually just click on this one. And then you, of course, you want to make sure that you're using a safe publisher. So it doesn't get much safer than Microsoft being the publisher. So you see by Microsoft to the right of the actual title. And if you see Microsoft, then you can trust it. You'll see all the big names that you can trust. But then the thing is that certain people will sit down and make these libraries, and not discrediting them or anything, but not everyone has your best interest at heart. Some of them are malicious. As much as NuGet may try to weed out the malicious ones, they do tell you that they are not responsible for anything that may happen to you or your product if you download anything from them, right? So you want to use this one. So you can click this little black arrow to the right, or you can just click install. And then you can give it some time now where it's going to go ahead, gather all dependencies. It may use more than one libraries. And then it's going to download what we call DLLs, which are like packages that have a bunch of libraries. So, every time we write a class, how we say using this or using that, those are actual DLLs or libraries full of functions, right? So it's just downloading a bunch of libraries. So you can just say, I accept, and allow it to download as many as it may need to. So we give it some time. And then when it's done, if you go over to your Solution Explorer and drop down references, then you're going to see a bunch of new references. You probably didn't do this before, so you can just take note of the fact that you have system.security, system.security.cryptography.algorithms, and you have a bunch of others. You will also see the entity framework ones that got added when we added our EDMX diagram and so on. So that's what NuGet brings to the table. It allows you to just install a package without going and fetching these from all over the internet and trying to inject them into your project manually. All right. So now that I've added these algorithms, it's time to actually put one to use. All right. So I'm going to use the SHA-256. I think that's a good, nice, secure one. And then I'm going to walk you through exactly what needs to be done in order to get it to encrypt. So firstly, you always want to encrypt your password one way, which means that you're encrypting your password for storage. You're never decrypting your password for comparison. So that means if I am creating a user, right? If I have a form, like when you sign up for anything on the internet and you put in a username, and you would have typed your password in plain text because you type it the way you know to spell it. When you click submit, what happens is that system will take that password and encrypt it and save it. Now, after that, each time you try to log in, it will take whatever you put in that password field and then encrypt it and then compare this encryption with the stored encryption. It will never take the stored encryption and try to decrypt it to match it against your plain text. All right, I hope that made sense. So you always encrypt one way. So what we need to do here is encrypt the password that is being provided and then compare it against, the password that is being stored. So there are two things we need to fix. One, the encryption for the comparison, and two, the actual password being stored. We need to modify that also. So firstly, I'm going to declare a variable, or an object rather, and this is going to be of type SHA-256. Now, SHA-256, and then the red line is going to come up because then it doesn't recognize that, and I'm just going to call it SHA is equal to SHA-256.create. Red lines galore. Let's see what the red lines have to say. So if I hover over the red line, or the line with the red line, the word with the red line, it will give me the light bulb, and it will tell me that I need to include the use of this library. See, I need that statement. So if I click that, follow the guidelines, then everything is blue, and now it looks more acceptable. So I need to include that library to access the encryption algorithm I'm about to use. So having made reference to the SHA-256 and then gotten the username and password from our text box, the next thing I want to do is compute a hash. So I'm going to convert the input string to a byte array and compute the hash. So I'm getting the value password, I'm passing it into the SHA.compute hash, which does an encoding over it, and then it converts it into a byte array. So in C#, that's how you declare an array, and then that's the data type, and the variable is called data. All right. Having done that, we need to construct a string. So firstly, I need to declare a string builder object, right? So that I can collect the bytes and create a string with it. And then after I do that string builder, I am going to use a for loop and then construct that string using the different data points from the byte array. All right. So let me go through this again. I'm converting everything, converting the string into a byte array, right, called data. And then I'm just declaring a string builder object so that I can further use it inside of a for loop where I'm saying, give me I equals 0. I should run to the length of the data byte array, whatever length that came up to, and increment accordingly. And then I'm saying string builder, just append each subscript in my byte array while converting it to string. All right. After doing all of that, I'm then going to assign the value to a password or to a variable called hashed password. All right. So string builder dot to string, storing it as hashed password. So at the end of this operation, whatever it is you typed in as the password would have been completely changed by the end of this operation into something that you may not recognize. I do say may not recognize, I really should say should not recognize. So I'm just going to set a breakpoint right here on the line where I try to fetch the user, and I'm going to show you exactly what the word gets transformed into. All right, so I typed in admin password and we're at the breakpoint. So first, let me show you the text that I typed in would have been password, right? And then the text that is now hashed looks like this. Now, this is not the word password. Well, it really is the word password, and that's how it should look in our database, such that if somebody comes along and sees it in the database, there's no way they should be able to tell me that this is the word password. All right. And if I continue with the code where I'm now going to look into the database, well, this will continue because it's still looking for. Just stop the execution. And then what I really should be comparing what's in the database with is the value that is in hashed password and not password. Now, if I run this again, right, and I'm just removing the breakpoint. So if I run this again and try to log in and I'm trying to compare the password in the database, which is q.password, with the hashed password, then it will be a mismatch because our database is storing the word password and hash password does not look anything like the word password. So then that tells me that the hashed password is what should really be in the database. So let me just click start again and drive that point home real quickly. All right, so I typed in admin and password and I click login. And then what it will do is try and compare the hashed password with password. And you see, please provide valid credentials. Okay, so if I just put a breakpoint here again, and then I attempt this login, and I'm doing that just so I can get a hold of the value that is in hashed password. So I want all of this value, excluding the quotation marks, of course. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm just going to cheat a little. I'm going to go into my database and I'm going to put that hashed password as the value. All right. So that's one of the reasons I set the password length to be 100, varchar 100 and not varchar 50, because that's what a password is supposed to look like in your database. Nobody should be able to look in the database and see that the admin's password is the word password. Let them see 5E888 blah blah blah, and if they've taken the time to memorize all of this, they need a life, really and truly. All right, and then decrypting it won't be the easiest thing in the world either. So let's us try that again. So now that I've changed it in the database right before the comparison was done, when it does the comparison and I click continue, then it should proceed. All right. So let's try that one more time just to make sure that everything is okay. So I'm going to once again start, and then this is going to launch my login screen, which is going to prompt me to enter my username and password. So my username is the word admin, and my password is the word password. See, that's what I typed. Then I click login. It then hashes that password, compares it against what's in the database, realizes that the two words hash to be the same, and then it proceeds. So if I make a spelling error inside of my password, then the hash is going to be different and it's not valid. All right. So of course, when creating users, if you want to extend this functionality now and put in some user management capabilities in this application, when you're creating the user, if you are the one setting the password, just make sure that you're going to follow these steps, this algorithm where you declare the algorithm you're using, one, and try and use one algorithm throughout your application. You don't want to use MD5 here and SHA over there, because the hashes will look different and you may run into problems, right? So always use one hashing algorithm, and then you create your byte array, and then you rebuild that string based on the different parts that went into the byte array, and then you use the hashed password after that for every other operation. And that is a quick way to add some login functionality to your application.